The Viltrumite War was the largest military conflict the coalition of planets had ever fought. It lasted months, covered multiple star systems, and ended with a planet destroyed, the coalition's leader dead, and Thragg still alive on Earth with 37 Viltrumites, and a plan nobody had prepared for. Here is every fight, ranked from the campaign's opening moves to the engagement that changed everything. Let's break this down. Coalition's Liberation Campaign. For nearly 2 months, the Coalition launched coordinated attacks across every planet the Viltrum Empire had occupied, a sustained military operation designed to strip the Empire of its territorial holdings, cut off its resource base, and create the conditions for the decisive confrontation with Thragg that Thetis had been building toward. The campaign was the war's operational foundation. Without liberating the occupied worlds, the Coalition had neither the political legitimacy to claim the war was about freedom rather than survival, nor the practical momentum needed to present Thragg with a situation desperate enough to force him to commit his best Viltrumite warriors to a direct engagement. Individual Coalition member species fought alongside Nolan, Alan, and Coalition operatives across dozens of planetary engagements, each one removing another piece of the Empire's infrastructure. The show documented this phase through its scope rather than its individual moments. The war in its liberation phase was a campaign of aggregate effects rather than individual confrontations, and the Coalition's success in it was what positioned them to force the Battle of Taliscria and subsequently the Battle of Viltrum. The fights in this phase were real and costly. The show treated them as the necessary work that preceded the dramatic fights rather than the dramatic fights themselves. Conquest vs. Invincible Round 2. Mark killed him in space, and the killing was the war's most significant single indicator of how much Mark had changed. The first Conquest fight in Season 3 had nearly ended Mark, a Viltrumite champion described by other Viltrumites as among their most feared warriors, reaching the specific level where continuing would have killed both of them. Mark survived that fight, damaged. The second fight, which Thragg had authorized specifically to eliminate Mark as a Coalition asset, and to test what the half-human Viltrumite was actually capable of, produced a different outcome. The pressure of the engagement, the specific stakes involved, and the accumulated experience and physical development that the first fight had contributed to produced a Mark who accessed capability beyond what his previous baseline had allowed. The show's documentation of the Viltrumite biological response to extreme stress, improving the fighter through the stress rather than simply consuming them. Mark killed Conquest. He had beaten the second strongest Viltrumite in the Empire in direct combat, which was information the war needed both sides to have. For the Coalition, it confirmed that Mark was becoming something the war could be built around. For Thragg, who was subsequently informed of Conquest's death directly by Mark's declaration during the Battle of Viltrum, it was the specific data point that changed how he assessed the Grayson family as a long-term threat. Alan and Nolan versus Viltrumite executioners. Thragg sent 2 Viltrumites specifically to eliminate the Coalition's most operationally important pair, the Viltrumite who had defected and the alien whose growing capability made him a genuine physical threat, and both nearly succeeded. The executioners were not Thragg tier, but they were Viltrumites with the specific assignment to kill rather than to test or capture, which produced a fight whose stakes were the war's immediate continuity. Alan the alien's role in the Coalition by that point was too central to lose. His relationships, his operational knowledge, and his specific physical development post-enhancement made him irreplaceable in the way that field assets who have absorbed multiple near-fatal experiences and grown stronger through them become irreplaceable. Nolan's defection was the Coalition's most significant intelligence asset regarding Viltrumite capabilities, weaknesses, and strategic priorities. Losing either would have materially altered the war's course. The fight's conclusion, both surviving, both seriously damaged, both requiring recovery time, was the show's documentation that Thragg's decision to eliminate them through proxies rather than personally was the specific tactical choice that kept the Coalition viable. Thragg acting directly against them at that stage would have produced a different outcome. The executioners were capable but not the Grand Regent, and the war's trajectory depended on that distinction holding long enough for the Coalition to complete its preparations. The Rognar Incident. Space Racer arrived with the Rognar under mind control devices, and what followed was the show's most chaotic single engagement in the war, involving multiple species simultaneously in a conflict that had not been planned to accommodate all of them at once. The Rognar were documented in the show as one of the few species capable of physically damaging Viltrumites, razor-sharp fangs and claws that could tear through Viltrumite skin in the way that most physical attacks could not. Their deployment by Space Racer, under Coalition control through the mind control devices he arrived with, introduced a biological weapon into the engagement that neither side had anticipated managing simultaneously. The Viltrumites, who understood Rognar as a threat that even their physical superiority did not trivialize, had to divide their attention between the Coalition combatants and creatures specifically adapted to injure them. The chaos this produced was the engagement's specific value, not a clean fight with a clear outcome, but a disruption that shifted the balance enough for other Coalition elements to operate in the space the disruption created. Thragg's response, recommending that the Viltrumites let the vastness of space kill the Rognar rather than engaging them directly, was the show's documentation that even Thragg made tactical assessments about which fights were worth having and which were not. The Rognar were a threat he chose not to engage personally, which communicated something specific about the threshold at which his personal involvement became worthwhile. The Battle of Taliskria, Thragg attacked Coalition headquarters using a mole he had positioned inside the Coalition's command structure, a traitor who disabled the planetary defense barrier at the critical moment, allowing the Viltrumite warships to begin laying waste to Taliskria before the Coalition could mount organized resistance. The attack was the war's most strategically sophisticated Viltrumite operation. Rather than direct confrontation, Thragg had built an intelligence asset, waited for the right moment, and used the asset to convert a defensive strength into a vulnerability. The planetary defense barrier was Taliskria's primary protection. Its removal turned Coalition headquarters from a hardened target into an exposed civilian population. The Coalition's response, and the Coalition allies who mounted defense before the Graysons arrived, was enough to slow the assault, but the show documented the damage honestly. Taliskria took severe losses before the attack was repelled. The show's staging of the Grayson family's arrival as the turning point was the Viltrumite War's most explicit statement about what the Grayson name meant to both sides. Nolan, Mark, and Oliver arriving changed the calculus enough that Thragg ordered retreat rather than continuing an engagement where the variables had shifted. He had come to eliminate Thetis and found a situation where pressing the advantage meant fighting the people he had already identified as the war's most significant individual threats in a theater that had not resolved favorably. He retreated to Viltrum, Thetis followed, Thragg vs. Nolan at Viltrum, Thragg offered amnesty, Nolan refused, Thragg sent him through a planet. The specific confrontation that began when Nolan attempted to attack Thragg during the Coalition's assault on Viltrum was the show's most direct staging of the capability differential between the strongest Viltrumite ever bred and one of the most capable Viltrumite warriors of the preceding generation. Thragg's response to Nolan's attack was effortless. He sidestepped it without apparent urgency and delivered a counterstrike that sent Nolan from orbit to the surface of Viltrum with enough force to crater the Imperial courtyard. The conversation that followed in the ruins of the Imperial Palace was the war's most morally complicated moment, Thragg offering Nolan the chance to come back, framing the offer in terms of Viltrumite survival, and the specific accusation that Thetis would eventually turn on Mark and Oliver when the immediate Viltrumite threat was eliminated. The offer was not entirely cynical. Thragg's assessment of Thetis' willingness to sacrifice Viltrumite-adjacent people for Coalition security was accurate, as subsequent events confirmed. Nolan's refusal and the resumption of fighting produced the moment that the show staged as Thragg demonstrating his relationship to even the most capable Viltrumites, punching Nolan past the ring system and away from the planet from the surface of Viltrum. A single blow covering the distance from the surface to the planet's orbital debris field. Oliver versus Thragg. He charged alone. The outcome was documented in the most specific terms the show deployed for any injury in the Viltrumite War. Thragg crushed his hand, punched his lower jaw off, and ripped his left arm from his body. Oliver Grayson's decision to attack Thragg independently, after watching Nolan be casually dismissed, was the show's most precise illustration of the gap between what the Grayson family's anger could motivate and what it could accomplish against the strongest Viltrumite alive. Oliver had fought, Oliver had developed, Oliver was a Viltrumite hybrid whose growth trajectory was meaningful at the level of most threats the Coalition encountered. None of this mattered against Thragg, who processed Oliver's attack with the specific quality of someone addressing a lesser physical problem before returning to the more interesting tactical situation. Mark's response, charging in with the declaration that he had killed Conquest and would do the same to Thragg, produced a nosebleed from the Grand Regent. A nosebleed. The show staged this as the specific metric for where Mark's capability sat relative to Thragg's at that moment in the war. The most significant injury Mark could produce was the amount of blood that a minor facial impact generated. Thragg's verbal response, "You are in over your head," was not bravado. It was a physical assessment delivered with the clinical certainty of someone who had just received the full measure of what Mark could do and found it categorically insufficient. The destruction of Viltrum and its aftermath. Nolan's plan, improvised in the moment after everything else had failed, was to destroy the planet. Space Racer's Infinity Ray punched a hole through Viltrum's surface while Nolan, Mark, and Thetis dove through it at full speed, boring through the planet's crust and into its core. The shockwave from what they released destroyed Viltrum, the planet the Viltrumite Empire had been built from, the homeworld that Thragg had referenced as the anchor of everything the Empire stood for, was eliminated in the most direct way available. 3 people flew through it until it stopped being a planet. The aftermath was worse than the destruction. Thetis surfaced to declare that surrender was the only option. Thragg, who had suffered no meaningful injuries from the planetary shockwave, emerged crying. The rage of the Grand Regent, watching his home destroyed, expressed through tears before converting into action. He decapitated Thetis faster than anyone present could intervene. Avenging Emperor Argal was the personal mission Thragg had declared the moment he assumed the Grand Regent title, and he completed it in the ruins of the world it had cost him. What followed was Thragg impaling Nolan through the abdomen and gouging out Mark's eyes before the remaining Viltrumites withdrew, leaving the 2 Graysons in space severely wounded. The Coalition had destroyed a planet. The war's outcome was that Thragg was still alive, Thetis was dead, Alan had a posthumous message containing a perfected Scourge virus, and 37 Viltrumites were now quietly moving to Earth with a plan that nobody had fought a war to prevent because nobody had known to look for it.